Okay. So, as I said today, we're just going to talk a little bit about creative nonfiction. I write a lot of creative nonfiction. I think it's probably I write creative nonfiction and poetry. I think those go like hand to hand, hand in hand pretty well with each other. Do y'all have any experience writing creative nonfiction?
Not really.
Do you, do either of y'all know what it is? I'll take that as a no, but we're going to like cover a little bit of this. So hopefully you all get some insight. Yeah. So this is like a table of contents. Claire made the slideshow, so I might deviate from it. Just a warning. So last week, apparently y'all went over, I don't know if y'all were here last week and who taught y'all, but last week, apparently we y'all went over some humor and satire. So let's review humor and satire with a quick exercise. So what are some specific elements that can make something humorous? Do y'all have any thoughts about this?
Like odd jokes, maybe.
Okay, that's good. Like, I think, would you like to elaborate upon that?
So jokes that don't really make sense, but they just fit in the context.
Okay, that's a good way of putting it. Very well articulated. Ali, would you like to add anything?
Mm, not really.
Okay, I think that humor in like this case, the example that we have here is like three items in a list, and the last one is strange. Um, Let me move this so I can see the screen. Three items in a list. It's not vacation without awesome trips, Instagrammable posts, and the overwhelming burden of a May AP exam looming over your shoulder. I don't know, y'all are like pretty young, so I don't know if y'all take any. Well, you probably will in the future, but an AP exam is kind of like an end of year test, for high schoolers. So I feel like this is like the humor that Joseph was talking about. It's something that like doesn't make sense, but it fits in the context of something. This does fit in the context of what's happening here. So it is a bit of I would say like dry humor. Does that make sense to you?
Hmm.
So that's just like a quick review. And I think humor is probably very important in creative nonfiction. I keep on having to move this around. Creative nonfiction or CNF is it's a very, very broad genre. People use this term. I feel like they use this term a little more than it is warranted. It's a very like gray term. Like people say this is creative nonfiction, not creative nonfiction. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But it like creative nonfiction is just something that you write through a creative lens that is that is true, if that makes sense. That is true to the person. So I would say an autobiography in some instances is considered creative nonfiction. I hesitate I don't know if I would categorize biography as a creative nonfiction because a lot of biographies are I feel like may lack like the creative aspect, but it some biographies may be. But the big one that people talk a lot about in creative nonfiction is called the personal memoir. Do y'all know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
give me a definition.
So it's like um just like a piece of your life, just like a small speck of it, and you write about like that small story and what really is in the picture.
Mhm. That's a very articulate way of saying it. It's a memoir is about somebody's life, but obviously I feel like the life is like very difficult to capture. I feel those are very cool emojis, Ali. But they're very it's life is very hard to capture. So I think when we talk about a personal memoir, a lot of the times we're referring to something that's like almost like Joseph said, like a spec. It's like something that's almost more manageable to do in writing. Obviously, there are people who write about their entire lives. I feel like that maybe leans a little bit more toward biography. It's just about creative nonfiction. It's just something that's creative and it's something that's true, in my opinion. It's in the title. And creative nonfiction, by definition, is when somebody writes a true story. There it is. And journalism writing is a creative. I feel like journalism writing could also be creative nonfiction in some ways. Very flexible medium. So that's kind of the introduction. And some general tips. You can definitely stray from the general tips. People are always like learn the rules before you know how to break them. So some tips to think about, but also not don't follow them completely. Stick to the facts. I think this one is actually something you should be mindful of to keep the truth um in your sight. Like to not really let go of the truth. The truth to the writer is not necessarily always the truth to somebody else or the overall truth, if that makes sense. And second, build stories and through lines. Like you don't want to start something and then just kind of end it midway, if that makes sense. Make it memorable. Yeah, I feel like the more you can capture the reader's attention, like typically we think the better a story is. There are obviously like some like gray areas around this, but when you're just beginning, like that's maybe like a good rule to keep in mind. And um, review and reflect. So make sure you're actually telling the story. Oh, so like his, Alexander Hamilton. I've never actually seen Hamilton in its entirety, so apparently it's historically accurate. So it's important to stick to the facts. Does that mean you have to narrate or say every single thing that happens? Do y'all,
Mm,
what do y'all think?
Nope, not every single thing, but just the key details and maybe some minor ones.
Wait, that's so well worded. Yeah. What is and like obviously like there's so many things that somebody notices or maybe you don't even notice. It's good to notice things, but like you notice things so you can be able to like maybe omit them just in case. Like let's say I notice like 10 things and I use like 3 of them. It's better to notice more and use less than notice less and have to use even less, if that makes sense. So it's important to notice, but you don't really have to narrate every single thing or else the writing becomes very redundant. Something to keep in mind. Good good call, Ali. And oh, this is a no. Stories get tedious if you say everything, so try to limit it to a few key ideas. Make it memorable. The smaller or more specific an item, the more memorable it will be. Okay, your goal is to have a few repeating memorable objects or ideas to make your audience recall as they read. I don't agree with the slideshow in its entirety right here, but I think at this point, like I mean this sentence in its entirety right here, but I think that it does pose a good point that you could start out like using, and then as you progress in writing, you can technically kind of break the rules, if that makes sense. So let's say I have like this pen right here, and this pen is like very significant to me at the beginning of the story, and somehow like my relationship with this pen changes as I progress as a character because maybe this pen is like given to me or something or part of my identity. Then this is definitely true. Um your goal is to have a few repeating items. So if this item keeps on repeating, then we often think of it as some type of like theme that's going on. How does like the object show how the person is changing in this instance? Does that make sense to y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. It's easier said than done, obviously. Like I say it, but then when you actually go and do it, it proves to be a lot harder than it is. Um, but the smaller or more specific an item, the more memorable it will be. I tend to think this is true because if you're saying, um, but I have seen people do this with maybe not so small items. So like if for me in my writing, like the sky is important to me. Like I like to watch the changes in like the clouds or something like that. The sky is not really that small or specific item, but it could be very memorable to the piece. So a lot of this first part is less so what the item is and more so how you portray the item or what the writer makes the item out to be, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sky could be like very personal to me in my writing, but very impersonal to somebody else in their writing. And it's just something that like it doesn't like I'm saying that it doesn't like the item doesn't have to be very small, but there's also a degree to where if you like pinpoint like the Costco down the street, like that is like typically like it's memorable to some people. So there's like always kind of a this or that. There's always kind of like um the these rules can always kind of keep kind of be broken, as I was saying. And how can we make something more specific and memorable? I went to my grandfather's bakery a lot when I was young. And let's see. For a young Japanese kid living in California, there was nothing better than Nipponya. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. I spend Sunday mornings watching my grandfather pound mochi cakes, coating my hands with light powdered sugar and sticky red bean paste. See, the sentence gets a lot more detailed. Like we can visually see what's happening in this sentence. So more like this, not like the smaller or more specific an item is, it's just how much detail you go into as a writer. Like I wouldn't say the bakery is small, but okay, the specificity is a part of the detail. If you give a lot of detail to something right here, it becomes more memorable. That's something like the writer is the person who attributes this detail. So that I think that's kind of important to know. Are we good?
Yep.
Mhm. Let me know, stop me at any time if you have any questions. So use what we've learned, concentrate figurative language. Oh, I think I skipped that point in number 4, but this is presumably tying back to like some of the old slideshows maybe y'all went through. So concentrate figurative language and crucial moments, beginning and endings, turning points, indicating important moments or themes. I think this portion is important to put figurative language when something relevant is happening also in the story. There should still be a story. You need a beginning, middle, and end. I think she means like poetry here. What we do with a through line. You should make still make sure the story progresses in an interesting and logical manner. So basically all of this is trying to keep your reader's attention. Review and reflect. Usually we have to try to give a central lesson in the story. Never give up on the things that are important to us. Your narrator should try to reflect or review their life in some ways. I actually really like this slide. I think that um I don't think that this first point is always true, but I think that the second point is so much true. I think that I reflect a lot in my writing typically. Um I don't, I think when you start to write the creative nonfiction, you typically tend to do have like a central lesson to the story. But as you start to write more and more, the central lesson becomes harder and harder almost like harder and harder to identify, or there becomes multiple central like lessons. Like you could read a story and get something different than if I read a story. I think that kind of progresses as you write more and more, if that makes sense. But this is not a bad like first beginning tip to stick with. I actually really think that this is something like reflection is something like really critically important. Um, in creative nonfiction, your narrator should try to reflect or review their life in some way. Yeah, I think because the act of writing creative nonfiction is kind of an act of reflecting on something that has happened before, right? So even the act of writing it is a form of reflection, and your narrators themselves can sit there and also sit and reflect on what has happened. Like I learned something, 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 or this taught me, blah blah blah. But sometimes it's less explicit than that. Yeah. As a class, read the following creative nonfiction from a Droit journal. Where do we notice the following elements? Stick to the facts. Okay. Do we want to do that right now? Let me pause the
Sure.
screen sharing. Wait, let me paste this in the chat. I have heard of this writer, but have not read this piece actually. Okay. We can probably just read it from my screen, what remains. Do we want to do popcorn reading where each one of us reads a paragraph?
Sure.
What about you, Allie? If y'all don't want to, we can all obviously just read silently.
I think I want to also.
I'll read together.
Mhm.
All right. Very cooperative group here. So I guess I can start. What remains? There is a quiet ache in my grandparents' house, a house of thin oak and chipped paint. The floorboards splinter underfoot, pricking unsocked feet. As a child, I'd sit on those floors, tracing the grain, letting my nails follow the loops and spirals until I grew dizzy, as if I might peel back the years, the rings of wood revealing childhood Christmases stacked like strata beneath the surface. Does anyone want to continue?
Hmm. They were the kind of Christmases plucked from the TV screen, glossy colors and sugar-dusted nostalgia. A chubby pine swollen with water, weight, and memory, its branches tangled with bright, uneven ornaments we made when my brother and I were small enough to fumble over glue sticks and glitter. My grandmother placed these crude creations above the store-bought baubles and porcelain
Lynn.
spheres. She could never choose just one to be the star, so she clustered them at the top, making them kings,
Exalted.
exalted them to the highest rank in the holiday hierarchy. They were a sacred kind of Christmas, perfect snow-topped pictograms of the day.
I watched my grandmother's face crease into a smile as we walked through the door each season. She would curl her arms around me and ask about school and tussle my hair, reminding me I was young and cared for my world in LA melted away. My grandfather liked to mill about the house, stumbling into interactions rather than initiating them himself.
Initiating.
Initiating them himself. He was reserved, my dad liked to say, but always there, laughing quietly at every bad pun and fierce punchline. His love was soft, a fake strum of familial strings.
We visited my father's parents every December, looked forward to it even. But the year I turned 15, we stopped visiting my grandparents and began a new tradition, skiing in places like Aspen and Whistler, eating in room service dinners, and forgetting about our family on the East Coast. It was a gradual erasure, a soft closing on the door on their lives. We forgot to check in, to pay attention to the paint sprouting behind the wood. Would
I
you like
turned
to? Oh,
I turned 15, then 16, and I began to know my grandparents through whispered discussions between my mother and father. I heard my grandmother's voice bleeding through phone calls to my father as he helped her find a doctor for my grandfather. I learned to read my father's back once he hung up, to string each tense and muscle together, to watch the news settle into his bones.
When I finally saw my grandmother again in the summer this time, I realized how small she'd become, how small she had always been. Hugging her felt dangerous, her limbs ready to shatter like a porcelain under excess weight. I couldn't help but notice the silence.
we knew that if we spoke, we would have to mention how my grandfather choked on the syllables of my name, the helpless confusion glazing over his eyes as he failed to dissect his own DNA. I would have to confess that we dreaded this trip because we couldn't swallow the sadness that had invaded their home, the smell of Christmas dissipating into something sterile.
We didn't talk because no one talks about anything serious in my father's family. In small town America, no one discusses illness and regret over the dinner table. My grandmother, who refuses to say hate or stupid, didn't use words like Alzheimer's or dementia. She developed a quiet system. I found post-it notes stuck on objects around the house, reminders are printed across each. Brush your teeth. Take the blue pill first. This isn't yours. No one talked about them, but they were everywhere.
She tried to contain the pain, wrangle it by scheduling her days and regimenting her life, but it spread and spilled and crashed into her more than she liked. It leaked out through soft sobs in the shower and the weariness on her face.
My dad made spaghetti on the last night of our visit. Something special, he said. We were setting the table, and my grandmother reached for something in the cabinet, straining her limbs, and then laughing softly, a frail tinny noise like the sound of fracturing glass. You know, I'm not quite as strong as your ain't I? Especially with these bones of mine.
My family dotes on my mother's mother
Oh, I
because
think you skipped a paragraph.
wait, the
Yeah,
words
wait, yeah.
the words strained and stretched until they fell easily from her tongue. We heard her throat unclog, relax from expelling what had laid dormant in her chest all these years. We laughed, but it felt shallow. The laughter felt wrong because it was right. Not that she was inherently weaker than my other grandmother, but that her name oozes with pity while our Anane stars in anecdotes and stories.
My family dotes on my mother's mother because she survived coups and poverty and loss and still manages to plow her garden each day. She towers over life despite her years, cutting through time with the vigor of a 20-year-old, challenging my cousins to arm wrestling competitions and filling each room with the timbre of her voice. She's the strongest woman I know, my father likes to say.
You live much closer to my father's family than my mother's, yet they are always kept at a distance. My family lives in America, my father is American, and my skin runs paler than many of my friends, but our household has always been grounded in the Turkish side. I have no idea how to pronounce that. Consumed the walls, and we use Turkish to say our pleases and thank yous, our hellos and goodbyes. It is a complicit fact reigning our home that our Turkish roots are the relevant ones, the ones that matter.
It's been the case since before I existed, from the moment my parents reached across the Atlantic and found each other. My father married my mother knowing his life would fall between the cracks, but he will never be the interesting one. He grew up on the sidelines of the city, flew on a plane for the first time in 11th grade, someone he met a woman from the other side of the universe, from a culture so alien to his, he couldn't help but grow obsessed, marvel at each novelty.
So his children stood in awe beside him. I'm a writer, yet I never write about my father's side of the family because I assumed suburban Massachusetts was too plain. I've explored every facet of my Middle Eastern side, written poems and stories and memoirs about my mother and her mother, about my time spent in the Black Sea. I'm the humble character in each piece, the spoiled girl who learned to appreciate her privilege. I am the weak one.
But things are different with my grandmother, my father's mother. There is something different about her pain, at least to us. We visit Turkey, and every room fills with laughter and jokes. Conversation ebbs and flows, crescendos and softens. There is a liveliness, an indestructible joy that clings to the cobblestone and terracotta. We entered the homes of widows, of refugees and fishermen, but we never walked into the silence, into sadness. Quiet doesn't exist in Istanbul. So we look at our grandmother's pain and see the way it consumes her. Sorry.
My mother hates the concept of wasted pain, of running marathons just to feel something. It's an American thing, she says, her gravitation towards synthetic hardship. She hates that we put ourselves in situations to sweat and grip when people across the world can't escape their suffering. Quit after mile 20 and go home without worrying again. She can't help but wonder why my grandmother won't put my grandfather in a home, why she wouldn't hire help, why she insists on watching her husband turn into a stranger. It's a unique, um, amalgamated feeling,
Amalgamated, I think.
amal, amalgamated
Amalgamated feeling. Yeah.
feeling, a mixture of confusion and sympathy and impatience.
We turn away from my grandfather and his illness, how that illness has upended my grandmother's life because it's ugly. We need the comeback, the redemption for the main character to scale the mountain after hitting rock bottom. We want my grandmother to be like our Anne, to be indifferent to the trauma, to let it feel her for the better. But my grandmother is not the kind of woman to hold life by the throat, to make beauty from her pain. She lets it swallow her.
There's no language for what happens when love curdles, when devotion becomes a slow suffocation, when caring becomes caretaking. Her days blur into a series of small tasks, each hour spent dreading the next. So I watch her shrink, not physically, but into herself. The way she repeats the same questions, the way her voice falters as she reminds my grandfather who he is, like it's the last thing tethering him to this world. And maybe it is. Maybe she believes if she stops, if she lets go, he will disappear completely, and so will she. She will become a ghost of herself, and we'll mourn her in silence, remembering her for the sadness until we forget her altogether. And these are the translations. So I think the question is, where do we notice the elements? So number one, stick to the facts. Where do we notice that in the story? I feel like this story is a very good example of the points that Claire put.
Hmm.
And it brings part of her past and like her culture into the story.
Yeah. She talks about how are you referring to like how at the very beginning is like part of her past when she's talking about the Christmases thing, is that what you're referring about? And then her culture about how her parents meet. I think it's a good point. Do you have something to add, Ali?
Hmm. Not really.
Would you like to kind of see like tell us where you see maybe build stories and through lines through the piece? Like where is it like specifically narrating something?
Like, I think it's sort of narrating the. So, like, I think the writer is sort of narrating her own life.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the part y'all are very you're very right about that. She's specifically narrating like the part that's not reflection is the part where she's talking about really like her own life. She talks about watching her grandmother, etc. I think that that is like the story behind it. And the through line is from how she observes her grandmother, her relationship with her grandparents changing from the beginning of the story and when her grandfather falls sick. Like that's kind of the through line going between the elements of the story here. And this is I think the third one is more subjective. Where do y'all think the the um the piece becomes the most memorable? Like where does it stand out to you?
Hmm. I. I don't really know.
What do you think, Joseph? Is there oh, bro might have left. Oh, he's back. Is does it stand out to you in any way? Like, does a specific part of the story like catch your attention?
Um, when they don't come back for to her grandparents' house and how
Mhm.
she kind of just leaves them for a while.
Yeah. Um, I feel like the imagery right here, her and my grandmother's voice bleeding through phone calls. I think all this like the words bleeding, um her father's back, the tension, the muscle, like obviously the situation itself is very tense, but even like the people, like and how like they're physically shaped by the narrator, they're also very tense in these situations, right? So I think that's a good point. Something good, very that's definitely very memorable. I think the entire piece is very memorable. So use what we've learned. Specifically, let's go back to that slide. Are there instances where you all can remember figurative language in specific areas? You can go back to the piece.
I think the phone calls could be one of them. It
Yes.
shows like the distance between her and her grandparents.
Hmm. I think let me see. Yeah, the phone call here. I'm just trying to see if there's another instance. Yeah, I think it's just this paragraph actually. Has he helped her find a doctor? Like there's like even after the phone call, notably, like there is this silence in the household that cannot be broken. There is this like, as I said, there is this tension that they're referring to through the phone call, even though they're not talking about it in person. Um, the news settles into his bones. I think that's a good example of figurative language. It's very evocative imagery in this instance. What about you, Ali? Do you have any instances of figurative language that you remember? I think you're muted. Let me ask you to unmute.
Like, so maybe in the next paragraph where it's hugging her felt dangerous, her limbs
Hmm.
ready to shatter like porcelain,
Hmm.
excess weight.
Wow, good identification. Very specific. This is a simile right here. And yeah, I think that contrasting with what Joseph said, whole tension and the fact that when we're actually seeing the grandmother in person, she is very, very like kind of hollowed out from this tense, these very tense interactions um, as if she doesn't really have a lot of support in these instances. It's very prominent in this piece. And finally, I think the last one was use a review and reflect. I think I'm going to draw attention to the reflection part. Where do we think um, the narrator reflects the most within the piece?
When she comes back to her grandparents' house and like she realizes um what state her grandmother's and grandfather is in and um like how long she's disappeared for.
Oh, let me see. The part where she has, remember the part of the sticky notes? I think kind of, yeah, that she realizes that like there has have been like so many changes since she's left, like you said, and her grandmother who has developed this system of putting post-it notes. And then she begins this very notable reflection of how her grandmother is different from her maternal grandmother, how she tries to contain this pain. And she at the end she says her mother hates the idea of wasted pain. And there's this kind of contrast between her mother's side and her father's side of the family. And there is no language from when love curdles. Like I think this all what you're saying, that the difference that she comes back and she notices how different her father's side of the family is. And I think this part is very, very prominent here. That she does a lot of reflecting on how pain is processed differently in different sides of her family and between family members. What do you have anything to add, Allie? I'll take that as a no then maybe. Let's see. And y'all can, like I said, y'all can interrupt me at any time. It's not that formal. Yeah, so this is a very insightful piece, very tender writing here. So some practice that we have here. So what is something most people don't know about you and would be surprised to learn about? And if you find this like prompt kind of broad, more like you can think about what is a specific moment in your life that you really haven't like told anybody about that is meaningful to you in some ways. And um, you can start with a short paragraph or the beginning of a story, however much you get in the time allotted. Make sure to focus on the elements that we've kind of discussed. If you find that you maybe can't fit your paragraph into one of these elements, don't be too pressed about it. Just remember to remain true to yourself as you're writing. Is that okay with y'all? I will give you maybe like say like 8 minutes or let's see, 8 minute timer. Feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. I did not notice that the timer has went off, but it has. Um, I'm gonna stop y'all here. Do y'all care to share anything about your story or something that you wrote about that you particularly enjoyed? It's okay if it's not. It's meant to be something personal to some level.
I don't really want to share.
That's okay. What about you, Joseph?
I'll share. It was a chilly April evening, one that would light a path for the future. I stepped foot onto the field wearing my very bright white knickers, untouched jersey, and polished cleats. As I gazed across the perfect field ahead, something in me sparked. It was a sign. First baseball practice in my life, I thought to myself, one of many. And in that very moment, I walked across the dugout and ran onto the field as fast as my twig legs would get me.
Wow, that really you really made the most of the making it memorable part and also to use what we learned. I saw a lot of very, very descriptive imagery in that writing, but also compliments to you. Like a lot of people tend to like overuse the imagery, but I think you have a really good balance um between having imagery but not also like detracting away from the actual narrative because you're overusing imagery. Good job. And there's homework is on the next slide. So work on your portfolio project and read at least two pieces from the Scholastic Gallery in two different categories and summarize what they did in two sentences briefly. Um, do you not guys know what the Scholastic Gallery is? No, no, I can show y'all. I have not actually seen the hopefully it doesn't pull up my portal. The Scholastic Art and Writing Awards are like pretty popular, I would say. If you go, if you search up Scholastic Art and Writing, you get into artandwriting.org, you click gallery, and you click, there's art work in here as well, if you have writing categories. Um, and they'll give you writing by category. So I think what Claire means is to pick one from either of these categories and summarize what you think they did well and write a piece for your portfolio based on one of the two Scholastic pieces. So if you wanted to do poetry, you click here. And the national medalists are out this year, right? Um, say I wanted to do this piece, I would read it and then summarize and write about it. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I'll take that as a yes. And with that, I think that ends today's lesson. I'll give y'all my contact information just in case you have any questions. Um, this is my website, and if if you scroll, I think to the last page, you'll find my email and you can email me. If y'all have any questions, please let me know. It was really nice meeting y'all today, and I hope y'all have fun with the future lessons. Let me stop sharing the screen. I hope y'all have fun with your future lessons, and I hope this course has been enjoyable. I hope
Uh,
you're learning things new. Oh, do you have something to say?
can can we just ask you questions in the chat on Google Classroom?
I think so. I'm not like a very frequently like I don't like frequently check Google Classroom. So if you want like a quick reply, I'll just directly give you my email here.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to like write it down or something like that. No stress if you don't have any questions. But it was really nice meeting y'all.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions for the time being right now?
No.
Okay. What about you, Joseph?
No.
Y'all are so cute. I will see y'all. I don't know if I'm scheduled for next lesson, but if you have any questions, make sure to email me. And I hope you're enjoying this course.
Mm-hmm.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
afternoon, guys.
Bye.
Bye.